Humanly speaking, the Banner of Truth started because of a change of mind that Dr. Lloyd Jones had. In 1955, 56, we were impoverished young people, recently married, living in Oxford, not knowing which way to go. And he, in his kindness to help us, said, well, come and assist me for a while at Westminster Chapel. And you can take a Bible study class Wednesday night. Good. But then a few weeks later, he rang me up and said, this is his big change of mind. He said, I think not a Bible class on Wednesday night. He never told me why, but I can see the reason why. He was doing that all the time, at the height of his powers. And I was only, 25? Who would have wanted to come when he said, you do church history on Wednesday night. I said, but I've never seriously studied church history. You can do it, he said, you can do it. And this is the remarkable thing about Lloyd Jones. He had the capacity of making people think they could do something who never thought they could. So I was thrown in at the deep end to speak on church history. Well, as I got into it, I got excited about it. I thought, this is a wonderful thing. And of course, the Evangelical Library was quite near. So at these Wednesday night meetings, different people came along, most of them Westminster Chapel people, but one man stood out. He was very tall and dark and in his 40s. And then he asked me, could I come and talk with him? He had some questions for me. So I did, and I remember the day very distinctly. We were out walking, and he turned to me and said, these things we've been talking about, the Reformation and the Puritan, why is it that people don't know them? I said to him, it's because the books that tell these things aren't available. That was the start of a conversation. And his story was, he wasn't long converted. He was praying that God would lead him to do something useful in his lifetime. He was quite affluent, his business had been successful, but he wanted now to live for Christ. He was a serious Christian. And so when I talked to him about books, curiously, we had thought that in the 18th century, God raised up patrons, and we thought of the Countess of Huntingdon. And I think we partly thought, well, maybe God will raise up a woman. He raised up a man. His name was Jack Cullum. So in 1957, Jack Cullum and I drew up a trust deed to start the Banner of Truth Trust. So it started really at Westminster Chapel, and then it grew from there. Other people gave valuable advice, Dr. Lloyd Jones especially, and when the first books came out, actually they were stored at Westminster Chapel, and then Lloyd Jones, of course, commended them and told people why he believed that they were valuable, and that gave a wonderful beginning.
The Banner of Truth is organised with a board of trustees, and there are 7 trustees on the board, and they're responsible for setting direction and policy of the trust, and then I report to the trustees, and then it's my responsibility to make sure that those directions are kept to and targeted and aimed for during the day-to-day work of the Banner. We have 2 main locations. So we have the head office, which is in Edinburgh in Scotland, and then we have a location in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in North America as well. The American operation is primarily a sales and distribution operation, so all of the book production work, so the assessing of manuscripts, the editing of manuscripts, all that kind of work, the commissioning of print runs and so on, that's all driven out of the Edinburgh office. People sometimes ask us how we're funded as an organisation, and I think sometimes in America particularly, the fact that we're called the Banner of Truth Trust, people immediately in their minds assume that that means that there is a very big pot of money somewhere that's invested, and all this money then is generated from this trust fund. A lot of people think of a trust as being a trust fund. The reality is that the Banner of Truth Trust, the reason it's called a trust is just a technical legal matter in the UK. That's how we're registered with the non-profit organisation in the UK, which is the Charity Commission, and Oscar in Scotland. We have what's called a trust deed, and that's a document that defines who we are and how we operate. Now, we do have some gifts that have been received that do fund specific things. And so in that sense, those are sort of endowed funds that we've had. And those are used for specific things. But for the general operations that we're involved in, the general day-to-day running costs and so on, those things have to be covered by the sales of books. Some people ask us sometimes, what is a Banner of Truth book? What makes a Banner of Truth book? And there are things that we look for when we're publishing a book. One of the things that we're anxious to do is to make books that will be valuable for future generations, not just our own generation. So if you look at the history of the Trust, we started off back in the late 50s, and when we started off, the majority of our work was republishing books which had been long out of print. And that's what a lot of people know us for really today, is the republishing of Puritan works, republishing of Reformation works, republishing of 19th century works as well. And in a sense, what we're looking to do today is not just republishing, but working with live authors. And what we're looking for in a book is a book that will be valuable, not just today, but in 50 years.
We want to produce books that will resonate deeply with the age we live in, but that will transcend that age.
We have never published on the basis of what people out there want. Now, we can't, it would be irresponsible of us to bankrupt ourselves by producing books nobody would read. And so there's some kind of balance to be struck there. But we don't look for authors who are going to sell books. And we publish books, we don't always get it right, but we publish books that we think will have a lasting impact on people's lives.
Whether people have a hunger for good books has very little to do with their education or their intellect. It's got a lot to do with their spiritual hunger. If they've got real spiritual hunger, they can read the Puritans. But a man may have a first-class university degree and not be able to read Lloyd Jones or the Puritans, find them heavy and dull. It's all to do with spiritual appetite, isn't it? And this is what preaching is connected with books. If generally speaking, the books sell and are being read, aren't they? Where there are churches where people are hearing the truth preached and it dovetails in with their reading, they may say to the pastor, where can I find out more? And the pastor tells them. So books do sell where there isn't good preaching, but generally speaking, they two go together, don't they?
And I think probably Lloyd Jones understood this, that when he read the Puritans, and Jonathan Edwards, where he really started, I think, he saw this fusion of piety and learning, deep learning that was sanctified, biblical truth that was rich and that explored the depths of the human heart, and married together the truth of God as it was intended to impact and shape and style the life of the Christian. And that's our first concern for Banner Books.
We don't have the pressure of things such as shareholders. And that means that there are times we can take decisions in publishing which perhaps in a commercial for-profit publishing house you wouldn't be able to take. But we have books that we do, and we do them because we believe they need to be in print, and we believe people need to be able to access the material. And particularly things that may be resources for pastors, things that perhaps the only market for those books is pastors, and therefore the market is relatively small compared to all church members. But we would put those things in print because we believe firmly that they need to be in print today.
Well, actually, from the beginning, one of the things it decided to do was to produce good books, not simply in the sense of their contents, but actually in the sense of their manufacture.
Now that's particularly true with the hardback books, for instance, that we make, where we would produce books that are cloth bound. We use genuine cloths, we don't use paper-based cloths. We sew everything. Now in America, people would be familiar perhaps with the terminology Smythe sewing. That's what we do with all of our hardback books. So we look to produce a quality end product as well as the quality of the content.
We're not just publishing for today, we're publishing for the day of our children and our grandchildren, and maybe even our great-grandchildren. And that these books become something that we cherish not only in our own lifetime for our own ministry, but we pass them on to our children and our grandchildren. A book will last more than a lifetime if it's well put together.
The ministry of the Banner is in many ways multifaceted. A lot of people know us as a publisher. Some people realise that we run some conferences as well. So we have a ministers' conference here in the UK, and we also have a ministers' conference in North America.
The Banner Conference wants to nurture close fellowship. We want men to have the opportunity with some leisure to hear God's word and to reflect on it, and not to be distracted by 101 other things going on. So the conferences are purposefully low-key.
Those conferences are small by comparison with other conferences, and we've actually no desire for them to be anything else, because we want them to be opportunities for fellowship, where if you're at the conference, you can get to the speaker. He is one of your brothers. We're not big into, having gurus and so on. And so men come year after year. And it's like, I think for many of the men who come to the conference here and the conference in the States, it's a bit of an oasis in the desert for them, where they know they will meet brothers who will be able to share and help and encourage, and there'll be biblical ministry.
One of the other things we do in the UK is a conference for young people that runs over a weekend. It normally runs back to back with the ministers' conference. And then we have a couple of other one day or evening and a day conference that we run as well in the UK. What perhaps is not quite so well known are some of the other aspects of ministry. So it's not just publishing books, it's not just running conferences. We have a magazine, and the magazine is produced every month. What some people don't realise, in fact, is that the magazine was actually the first thing that the Banner of Truth did. So before the Banner of Truth ever published a book, the magazine came into existence, and really that was the start of the work of the Banner of Truth.
And then we have these hidden things like the book fund that we occasionally mention, where, we must have sent, endless thousands of books to all over the world, students, missionaries, pastors all over the place, just to help them in their ministry. And that's really a great ministry. But we kind of do things by stealth. We're stealth bombers of the gospel.
A lot of pastors, missionaries, individual Christians have benefited from the work of the Book Fund over the years. Sometimes we send the books for free, sometimes we subsidise the books very heavily, and people would pay a little bit for those books. They go all over the world. I usually say in the course of maybe 3 to 5 years, there's probably very few countries in the world that a Banner book wouldn't go to through the Book Fund. To see the value of the books to some of these people is just very moving. I at home have many, many books. I suppose you would expect somebody who works at the Banner is going to be somebody who's interested in books. And I have many bookshelves at home full of books. And I sometimes feel we perhaps don't value the resources that we've got in the way that we should. And when we get a letter from somebody who we sent a small parcel of books to, who perhaps there's 5, maybe 10 books that they've received, and you get a letter back saying, these books are like gold dust to me. They're all I have. You realise how privileged we are in the fact that I have many hundreds or thousands of books And yet to this person receiving this package of books in the book fund, this is gold dust to them. This is something they value so highly.